Welcome back, I'm Luke, the Crazy Maker Nerd. Today, we're going to make a WWII trench. Since restarting YouTube, my fiancé has been coming to me with a number of ideas, but the one that really caught my ear was...
Hey, can you make a WWII trench for me for when I teach the First World War?
Yeah, of course. Can I make it a big gaming terrain at the same time though?
Yeah, why not? The class are only going to use it certain times of the year.
So here we are, the first challenge from my fiancé.
I started off with a 1 foot square MDF board and cut up some cardboard to try and make some form of structure. Placing a miniature on the board, I decided roughly how tall the trench would need to be. Then scoring along the corrugation, I was able to check once again if it was at the right height. When I was happy with this, I decided to then duplicate the same height and the same scoring on a number of different pieces of cardboard. I then moved on to trying to work out the layout of the trenches. Firstly, I figured they'd be good to have a large slope off to no man's land on the front, so I adapted one of the newly cut pieces to be a slope, capping the ends off with some cardboard, just to make sure nothing falls inside later on. I then cut out 2 more large sections to produce the other side of the trench. After I glued them down, I decided to turn this into some form of T-junction. So I then cut out 2 more pieces, one shorter than the other, so it looked like the trench just ended after that T-junction. I also made sure all of the parts were capped and that each corner had a large piece of cardboard around the curve to make it look more natural. Time to get the gloves back on. I prepared a large bowl of water, put some Sculptamold in, mixing it with my fingers. Then, using nothing other than my hands and a lot of determination, I smoothed the Sculptamold all over the cardboard surfaces, trying to give them even coverage and make them look like mounds of mud. Once the cardboard was completely coated, I moved on to all of the rest of the MDF that was showing, making sure that all the trenches went up at a contour. Finally, I smoothed it all down with just some water and my fingers in the gloves. To save waiting for drying time, I put down some kitchen roll. I then sprayed the entire piece with a scenic matte spray to make it nice and tacky. Following this, I dusted all over using my own mud mixture, which you can watch on how to make in the other video. Occasionally, I'd bring the scenic matte spray out again to saturate some of the mud mixture to hold it down to the piece. When I was happy with the coverage, I pulled out some cork pieces and placed them as if they were boulders, large rocks and debris in some of the craters, once again saturating with the spray to hold them down. I also added some small pieces of slate and rock to add a bit of differentiation to the debris. As the rocks aren't particularly porous, I used some Mod Podge to hold them down. I then looked back at the source that my fiancé provided me to make the trench and realised there was a small bridge. So I used some balsa wood cut down to length and pushed it into the now partially wet Sculptamold. Once I was happy with the bridge layout, I pushed them into their final positions and used some super glue and activated to hold them down. To add some more realism, I then spread Mod Podge and added a little bit of dirt over the top. Now for something completely different. I bought some new Green Stuff World sandbags, flexible,
Careful now,
which are small bags of sand which are meant to saturate in PVA water and then place on your terrain. I thought I'd give these a go this time because I've not had a chance before, and they look pretty cool and they turned out quite nice.
One eternity later.
With all of the wet work done, I then moved on to the spray booth. Firstly, I flipped the part over and sprayed the entire base in black, trying not to forget it again. I then flipped the piece over and sprayed the entire thing in a dark brown. Moving on to a lighter brown on the higher points and greys all over the rocks. I also added a sand tone to all the sandbags. Once all the lighter colours were completed, I went back to brown and touched up any areas with a paintbrush, making sure there was no overspray visible. also used Sculptamold contrast paint all over the sandbags to give them a bit more of a rustic aesthetic. At this point, I needed to have a bit of a think and work out what to add to make it look a bit more realistic. So I got out some of my trusty crafting supplies and got to work. Firstly, I cut down a number of coffee stirrers and glued them down in place. This was to imitate a walkway that had sunken partly into the mud. I then used some corrugated cardboard to try and simulate ironwork and surrounded it with wooden battens for a support structure. Sometimes I glued the parts in place and trimmed them down, and other times I trimmed them down before they were stuck down. It all depended on how much of a weird contour I had to try and make it fit. I then looked back to the source my fiancé had provided to me and noticed that there was a wibbly wobbly wooden fence at the bottom of the trench. So I tried my best to try and replicate something similar, and I think it turned out looking pretty good. Yeah, I'm quite happy with that. I mixed some light moulding paste, some of my mud mixture and a bit of the brown paint all together, and then coated all of the edges of the wooden planks and various other areas. This is to make it once again look like all of the mud started to soak over the top of the items in the trench. To imitate No Man's Land, I then got out some Warlord games, scaled barbed wire, and twirled it around a wooden stick. I then cut the pieces into different lengths and used matchsticks without heads to represent fence posts, pushing them into the Sculptamold incline and supergluing them down. Finally, before allowing it to dry again, I used a dark wash all over the wooden planks and the fence posts to give them a bit more depth and realism. And now, we wait to dry. Again.
One eternity later.
Once the textured paste was dry, I went over it again with the same dark brown, just to make sure it colour matched. And edge highlighted all of the grey rocks with a lighter grey. This included pulling out some of the larger debris from the mud mixture. I also applied a lighter brown on some areas of the bridge to make it appear to be made of wood. I then duplicated this effect on some of the other wooden items that I produced using coffee stirrers. I then added a little bit of pizzazz by adding a small skull and painting it as if someone had been left behind in one of the shell holes. Now the inevitable dark wash occurred and I covered the entire terrain piece in a dark brown wash. Unfortunately, I couldn't find my homemade wash, so I sacrificed almost a whole pot of Citadel wash. Whoops. And of course, that meant another dry time. Again.
One eternity later.
After that ridiculously long dry time, I dry brushed a light brown all over the muddy areas, a sand colour all over the sandbags, and a light grey over all of the rocks. I also used a light grey on some of the fake corrugated steel. To add a little bit more gore and realism, I also put some blood around the skull. The final step was to put some muddy puddles all over the trench. For this I used a dark acrylic brown ink mixed with some clear UV resin. I then had to cure all the resin using my torch. This took quite a while.
The following statement was issued from the Foreign Office last night. Owing to the summary rejection by the German government of the request made by His Majesty's government for assurances that the neutrality of Belgium would be respected, His Majesty's ambassador in Berlin has received his passport, and His Majesty's government has declared to the German government that a state of war exists between Great Britain and Germany as from 11 p.m. on August 4th.
So there we go, a scrap-made World War I trench, which can be used for both education and as wargaming terrain. Make sure to hit that like and subscribe button and hit the bell icon in the corner. Also, check a comment below so I know what you enjoyed about the video. It's your feedback and comments that can help me grow as a YouTuber. Until next time, see you later, my nerds. Why are you still here? Go build some stuff.